All right, we are now live. Welcome to our Planning Commission informational meeting with about the growth plan, and we welcome our consultants today. And Nicole, I don't know if you want to do an opening welcome, and then maybe we'll do a round of introductions.
Sure. Maybe just for everybody to remind us why we're here. So for the public, my name is Nicole Crutchfield, Planning Director for the City of Fargo. And we are pleased today to we're officially starting the growth plan process. Basically, you might remember late fall, we did an RFP for consultants on an update for the growth plan. Through that selection process, we hired CZB. You might remember CZB as the consultants for the core neighborhoods plan. And we didn't see a whole lot of them in person because that was the pandemic years. But we're really looking forward to the growth plan process where we have a little bit more of a typical process in terms of interaction. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Rocky for introductions, and then we'll go from there. So thank you so much for joining us, commissioners.
Yeah, thanks everybody for being here. We do have a couple extra seats up here if there's anybody else from the city that wants to join our discussion. We'd welcome. We're a big tent type of group, so we'd be happy to do that. Otherwise, I'm Rocky Schneider. I'm the chair of the Fargo Planning Commission, and I'll go to my left.
I'm Tommy Schmidt on the Planning Commission.
Do we have to turn on today?
Yeah, I guess there's some technical, so you have a little green light is when you talk, and if you want to turn it off so no munching is heard, that'd be great too.
John Gunkelman, Fargo Planning Commission.
John, you can just leave yours off.
Off?
Jennifer Holtz, Fargo Planning Commission.
Art Rosenberg, Fargo Planning Commission.
And Brett Shirley with Fargo Planning Commission. Pete Lombardi with CZB.
Thomas Eddington with CZB.
Mark Williams, Fargo Planning Department.
Donald Kress, Fargo Planning Department.
Megan Elshaug, Fargo Planning Department.
Elena Espeseth, Planning Department.
Luke Mormon, Planning Department.
Kim Satrowski, Planning Department.
Brad Garcia, Planning Department.
I'm Charles Buki with CZB.
And I guess who's doing the presentation? Is CZB walking through a slideshow to start?
Yep.
Peter, that's you?
Yep.
Okay, yeah, we'll turn it over to you, and we'll quietly munch while we listen.
All right. Thanks, Rocky. And thanks, everyone, for coming here for this special presentation on the citywide master plan for growth. Our team is excited to be here. Charles, Thomas, and I are here for 3 days this week, meeting with the Planning Commission, meeting with city commissioners, meeting with our advisory committee, and just sort of reacquainting ourselves with the lay of the land here. As Nicole mentioned, we were involved in the Core Neighborhoods Master Plan, so we really look forward to kind of picking up from our understanding of the community from that process, but extending our scope citywide here. So for today's meeting, now that group introductions are out of the way, we have a handful of things we'd like to cover. First, just making sure everyone's on the same page in terms of what this planning project is, what it's about, what the process is that we've designed. Then we have a couple of discussions that we'd like to work through with you. One, to talk about some of what you see are priorities or big things that this process needs to get right. Our sense of priorities that will help to drive this growth planning process. And then we also have a method that we would like to share with you, the kitchen table conversation method, a small group conversation tool that we'll be tasking the advisory committee with, but we also would extend the opportunity for Planning Commission members to participate in this method and use it on your own if you wish, to solicit community feedback on some questions that are really important for us to get to for this growth planning process. So those are the items we'd like to cover today. Just a few more introductions. We have a team, in addition to our firm that we're working with on this project. We have Strategic Economics, a firm based in Berkeley, California, that'll be taking the lead on fiscal impact analysis. for this project, so helping us understand as we explore different growth scenarios, what are the fiscal impacts relative to growing in one way versus another way, one direction versus another direction. That'll really aid in the decision-making process. We have MRB Group, which is our engineering subconsultant, that'll help us understand the ins and outs of infrastructure capacity, future capacity needs. That's an important part of this work. And then Code Studio is our partner towards the end of this process to really understand how to make the handoff from the growth planning to LDC updating as seamless as possible, because we know that one of the city's aspirations going forward is to follow up the growth plan with LDC updates. So the project introduction we'd like to go through here briefly is just kind of centering everyone around where this project is lifting off from. We have a growth plan for the city of Fargo now that was put together in 2007. And we know that that is it's long in the tooth for a growth plan, and it's becoming less and less useful as a decision-making tool year after year. But Fargo continues to grow rapidly, so that's one of the spurs behind this project here. There are also a bunch of relatively new complicating factors for growth planning in Fargo. The diversion project, the core reinvestment needs that were identified through the Core Neighborhoods Master Plan and the Downtown Master Plan. Those are now factors that are increasingly important to consider. And the fact that Fargo, like most communities, year after year, you might struggle to reach consensus on what are the priorities in the short term and the long term. So using the growth planning process to kind of rekindle that discussion of priorities and kind of really get that straight to help guide the planning process. And what we're looking to produce over the course of this project is a plan that kind of clarifies what the vision for growth is going forward. You've identified a vision for growth in different ways, in different planning processes over the past decade. So this kind of tries to pull threads from those visions into this growth planning process and clarify it even further. It'll have values, community values and principles tied to that vision. That'll be something that we'll be looking to deliver as part of this process so that you have a framework for decision making at the end of the day. And an important part of the plan, obviously, is to have that action plan, that outline of what you need to accomplish in the short term and midterm to move the city towards achieving the vision for growth that is identified by the plan. So there are really three questions that'll be central to this whole process. How much growth, where to grow, and how to grow. And we'll be very deliberate about asking those questions and using a variety of different methods to find answers to those questions so that the plan is a really good reflection of where the community is on each of these issues. So how much growth, really it's about understanding how much growth might Fargo anticipate going forward. So, understanding demographic change, migration changes, some of those issues, but also probing the issue of how much growth is Fargo looking to accommodate. How much does it choose to grow by to the extent that it has some powers to decide how much it wants to grow by. So those are two questions to probe under that how much growth category. Where to grow. So if Fargo chooses to continue growing, which areas of the city should receive growth? What is the balance between growth in newly developed areas versus growth absorbed in redeveloped parts of the core neighborhoods or other neighborhoods throughout Fargo? And then how to grow. So if you decide that you wish to keep growing, if you decide which areas should absorb growth, then the issue is, what form should growth take where it happens? And that's an important issue that relates to the LDC and how that can be then updated to make sure that growth happens in the way that the community wants it to happen, that it looks and feels and functions the way that it wants to. So an important part at the beginning stage of this process is to understand where Fargo has been in the past few decades when it comes to the guidance that it has been using to influence growth. So 23 years ago, if you get to back to the turn of the century, the city was operating under a 1995 comprehensive plan that provided some guidance on how to grow, where to grow. 1999 was the last major revision to the LDC. And around 1999, you also had a growth plan that was explicitly called the Growth Plan for Urban Fringe and Extraterritorial Area of the City of Fargo. So it was a growth plan that was about guiding growth on the fringes of the City of Fargo. That was the kind of the focus of that particular planning process. If you go forward, 2007 is when the next growth plan came. That came in, pretty quickly after that previous growth plan because the city had kind of run out of land to grow. So there had to be a process to make sure that there was still guidance in place to shape growth. So that's when the 2007 plan came along. The 2012 comprehensive plan, Go 2030, followed up on that vision to a large extent. And then since then, you have the 2018 downtown plan, the 2021 core neighborhoods plan that further define what Fargo's vision for growth looks like. There are a number of other plans that are also have been put on the table that are relevant and we'll be looking at and reviewing. And you also have a lot of different institutions, NDSU, the hospitals, lots of different institutions that have their own strategic plans that are important to understand in terms of how they help to influence where and how Fargo grows. So this 2023-2024 growth plan pulls threads forward from the Go 2030 plan, from more recent sub-area plans. And again, the idea is that once this growth plan is finished in 2024, that will then lead into an LDC update so that the LDC is a good reflection of the growth plan as well as those other recent plans. It's well recognized now that it currently isn't. That was part of the LDC diagnostic report that was issued just a few years ago. So there's accumulating thinking about kind of what a new LDC should look like. The growth plan will really help to move that thinking forward. Before we go into talking about kind of the three phases, the scope of work for this growth plan, any questions so far about any of this background? Go ahead.
Maybe one question, because we switch gears. I think it makes now a lot of sense that we're going to look at. Can you explain how doing the growth plan ahead of the LDC and why that makes very good sense? I mean, because, we were going to jump into the LDC, and I think then the planning department figured out that we better figure out the growth plan, especially like with the diversion and everything. Can you explain how that will help us when the time comes? When we're done with the growth plan, we'll jump right into the LDC. Can you explain?
Yeah. That's a really important question. The sequencing is a really important matter. And maybe Charles, if you'd like to describe our thinking there.
Sure. So the growth, I think the most important thing to remember is that the growth plan is non-binding. The code becomes binding. The code becomes your implementing tool. And it's the growth plan that establishes the community's vision, right? That is yet to be implemented. It has no binding authority. So it neither grants nor takes away any vested rights, all right? But it's, in our experience, it's crucial to get the vision sharpened, right? Because it lays the foundation, not just the legal foundation, which it does, but it lays the foundation within the community from a consensus point of view about what you would hope to regulate. And so if you get those back, if you put the cart before the horse and you attempt to codify what has yet been articulated, right, you are constantly swimming upstream, number one. Number two, notice that we've tried to put those together as much as possible, so that there's not a lot of time between the finishing of one and the work of putting the second one together, right? You want the institutional memory of, so let's suppose your growth plan, excuse me, I didn't mean to put it back to you. Let's suppose you recommend adoption and the commission adopts the growth plan. If that's the case, you want the institutional memory very fresh and present in the community. What it is your community said yes to, because you're going to come right back after that, and now you're going to be negotiating vested rights, right? And while some people can get green around the gills in a planning process, they can get really green around the gills and you start talking about vested rights. So you have to get the planning done in advance and done well. Does that help? Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question about growth plans in general. When you look at growth plans, and Fargo's in particular, I noticed in there that we don't talk about incentives or government contributions or anything. Is that part of the plan where we focus in certain areas that we discuss? Because, I mean, right now it can be wherever, the economic development programs, everything else. Do most growth plans have some assessment of that and look at the incentives or the community commitments that are community development funds, all this other stuff? Do they look at those things globally in the plan? Or is that just layered in afterwards and we just kind of pick and choose what happens?
Probably the best way to think about this is that the growth plan itself has to fly at a certain altitude. And you don't want your growth plan to fly too low, to get into too much detail about the ins and outs of specific types of incentives or strategy tools. What you want your growth plan to do is to kind of paint the broad picture of in general, here's where you want to grow for what reasons, here's where you might not want to grow for these reasons. And the growth plan should provide guidance on how then to put either, to codify, that vision, or to assemble the right incentive tools to help stimulate growth where you want it to stimulate it. So you want the growth plan to kind of provide that broad guidance, but then kind of on a yearly basis, sort of crack open your incentive packages and sort of think, well, how well tuned are these right now to achieving this vision? And if there need to be some changes made after the growth plan is made to your incentive toolkit, that's a good time to make those changes, see how things go, see what the performance is over the next few years, crack open the incentives again, and there might be some tweaking that needs to be made based on the performance of development in different parts of the city. So Charles or Thomas, you would like to add anything to that?
I would add.
Can I just ask one follow-up, and maybe you could address that in your answer? Because I think, what the commissioner was talking about is almost like the LDC, right? You're getting to the codifying portion where you have the incentives, but what I was wondering about the growth plan is, you had talked previously about your other partners involved about, does the growth make sense from a financial standpoint? And we don't really consider that on our commission, and I think we probably should in some capacity, but we don't have a document to look at to say, does this growth make sense for that? And so maybe you could add to that portion too, what part of the growth plan tells us financially, does it make sense to grow this way?
You're gonna want your growth plan to do a good job of conveying the anticipated benefits and the anticipated costs of proceeding down path A, path B, path C, path D, so that you are effectively wrestling with the comparative net cost benefits from taking different potential approaches. And you're also going to want those scenarios to be sharply articulated enough so that the opportunity costs are something that can be evaluated by the community, right? By you as the commission, by as a planning commission, and then city commissioners as well. You also want to a really good plan is very. It is absolutely, Pete's absolutely right. It has to be at the right altitude. But for it to become very effective, it has to strike a balance between being sufficiently aspirational, but grounded in fiscal reality, grounded in political reality. So you wouldn't, for example, in a made-up case, knowing, let's say, I suppose invoking a steep slope ordinance in North Dakota is an unwise reference point, but I'll make it nonetheless. Let's suppose you were doing a mountain resort community that had 23% grade slopes, right? You would someday know you had to come back and codify that, right? The rules for development on those slopes, but you would know during the planning process that nobody's ever going to build on a 23% grade anyway. So let's not prioritize that in the plan. It's not practical. So you want the plan to be grounded in the probable, the practical, the realistic. So your numbers want to be sound, your projections want to be sound, and you'll find that balance between being aspirational and realistic in that document. And that paves the way for the coding work, the regulating work, the eventual incentive structures to find their way into adoption and use.
I think that's helpful. So there'll be some financial analysis portion of
There'll be
this.
extensive financial analysis.
Yeah, I think that'll be really helpful. And you may want to check out Mount Fargo if you haven't heard about it while you're in town, because this time of year, we pile all the snow in one area of town, and it's got a flag on top. It's a tourist attraction, I think. But no, I appreciate that. Any other questions at this point, or can we assume you have some other slides to go through?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
All right, thank you. Okay, so some of the last few questions might be clarified a little bit more by talking about the 3 phases of work that we'll be using to structure this planning process. So the next few slides talk about these phases and the timeline. What does the calendar look like for this process? What are all the pieces? So the first phase of the project we're calling our current path. And really what this is about is understanding what path is Fargo on now. So you have been growing over the past, 10, 20, well, you've always been growing pretty much. You've been growing particular way for the past 10 or 20 years. So understanding how and where Fargo has been growing and where will your current path take you if you don't do anything differently. If you keep growing as you're growing, if you keep using the same policy structure you've been using, where will that take you? What are the impacts, pro and con? And where we want to get to at the end of phase 1 is provide that picture in a way so that this commission, other stakeholders, the community can look at that path and come to a judgment. Is that a good path? We're happy to stay on that path. Is there something we want to tweak about it? Do we want to discard parts of that current path? Do we want to throw it out entirely? That's kind of an important decision-making juncture that we want to get to at the end of phase 1 that's based on where you've been and where you would go if you didn't change course at all. The judgments the feedback that we get from the community on that current path would then inform the second phase, our chosen path forward. So we would identify, as Charles just described, some alternative scenarios that would deviate from your current path in perhaps small ways, as well as some significant ways to demonstrate some alternative ways of growing. And that would be presented to the community, to this commission and others, to think about what are the pros and cons of growing in potentially different ways. What do you like and not like about the alternatives? And then using that feedback to identify what is the preferred growth path, which might end up being a kind of a hybrid of things you like from different alternatives. So the end of phase 2, it's really identifying what is the preferred path forward, what are the trade-offs that the community recognizes about its preferred path and is willing to make. So once that chosen path forward is ratified, then we move into phase 3, and that's taking that preferred path and translating it into a growth management plan that provides that decision-making framework to understand how decisions made at different levels of government will influence movement towards that vision. What are the policies and actions that will help Fargo codify and solidify that vision for growth? So that would include recommendations for how to use the LDC update to codify that vision and provide some general guidance, for example, on incentive structures and how to think about that as a piece of making that vision real. These 3 phases will play out over a 14-month process. You can see the arrow where we are here in March 2023. So we're just at the beginning of phase 1, where it's pretty heavy on data analysis and beginning with the stakeholder discussions. The transition from that phase 1 to phase 2, where we get some really good feedback on that current path and then start working on alternative scenarios, begins roughly in the June-July period. And then by the time we get to the end of this year, in December, we'll have worked with the community to identify what that chosen path is, and then spend the very end of the year and beginning of next year working on that full growth management plan. So the city staff will be in a really important sounding board throughout this process. This commission will be an important sounding board. The advisory committee that we're meeting with this afternoon will be an important sounding board, and we also have engagement processes designed for the general public. And this chart right here shows how these different engagement methods will populate the next 14 months. So this meeting here, advisory committee is one of our touch points. Presentations to this commission and discussions with city commissioners is another touch point. We'll also be issuing an assignment to the advisory committee that we'll talk with you about in a few minutes about this kitchen table conversation method. So that'll really be the formal beginning of public engagement is with the very first kitchen table conversation assignment. June, as you can see in that column, will be a very important month of a variety of different engagement methods. In addition to another kitchen table conversation, there'll be open houses in different parts of the city. There'll be an online survey that will really help to inform the selection of that chosen path forward. And then October will be another really important checkpoint with the public. Once alternative scenarios have been identified, presenting those to the public for their feedback. And then by March, there will be a full presentation of the growth management plan and showing that to the full public for final feedback. So that is kind of the rundown on the time frame of this project. As you can see, March of 2024 is the goal for having this completed. So around this time next year, we'll have the preferred path forward chosen, and then the growth plan that is designed to fit that path. Any questions about any of the ins and outs on the process of the project or any of the engagement that we have planned?
Thanks, Peter. This brought up one question. With the advisory committee, I guess I'm curious who's on the advisory committee, but maybe even a broader question. When our last growth plan between then and now, we're almost contiguous with West Fargo and obviously Moorhead and Horace, and others. How do we work with them to make sure what we're doing is not going to run at odds with them, because we're all sort of one community in a way?
Mm-hmm. I know that's been something that we've been talking to staff about, kind of the regional part of this. And I know Cass County engineer is serving on the technical advisory committee. And something that I know we've been talking to staff about is, identifying neighbors as stakeholders to meet with, to make sure that they're apprised of what this process is about, what are the issues that the city of Fargo is identifying, and to involve them in the conversation throughout, so that it's not a surprise to them next March what gets delivered, and to really identify opportunities for regional cooperation and coordination as part of the growth planning process.
Maybe just one follow-up. Our MetroCog, our Metropolitan Planning Organization that several of us sit on, their policy board, we're switching now because of our population to a transit management agency. Is that what it is, a TMA? I guess, I'm familiar with like Met Council in the Minneapolis area, but at what point does our community come to the point where we need to do these plans as a metro area as opposed to an individual city? And I'd be curious of your experience elsewhere and just what's the recommendation on those sort of things?
Well, I think it's certainly it's a good practice to think about, especially when something like growth is it will have regional impacts. The way Fargo grows will impact how others grow, and vice versa. I would say that you know, in the absence of a regional entity, you know, with the exception of the county, you know, if going forward, there were an interest in having kind of a countywide growth planning process, that's probably the easiest way to identify kind of an existing entity that would have the authority to kind of assemble all the stakeholders. But short of that, I think having multiple jurisdictions kind of coordinating with their own growth planning processes is the way to go. And from what we've gathered so far, that's what this process is kind of engineered to try to do. And probably based on what we've heard about previous growth planning processes that the city has done, that this will probably be the most open regional process that the city has seen so far, where it's really treating its neighbors as, you know, as regional partners to be having a shared conversation about growth. You know, whether it makes sense going forward to have a single regional growth plan that is coordinated at the county level or, you know, through MetroCog, I think that's a good question. But this particular process is more region focused, I would say, than previous city growth plans.
Yeah, one of the complications is,
Just a reminder to everybody to turn on your mic.
yeah, one of the complications is that we have another state that's involved. So it's not just the county or,
Good point.
you know, North Dakota. We have to consider Minnesota as well. So I think it's really important to include everyone, and it may be more complicated to do so because of that border.
Yeah.
But it seems that maybe MetroCog is the organization that encompasses them all. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That's right. And MetroCog is on the technical advisory committee as well as the county's engineer. So, Charles?
The question also, I think, again, underscores something Pete said earlier, which is making sure that your growth plan is at the right altitude. The extent to which it's a bit too fine-grained is the extent to which it's responding to highly localized conditions that wouldn't be shared by surrounding jurisdictions. The extent to which you can get the altitude up enough to capture the shared circumstances of your adjoining jurisdictions and use a nomenclature and vocabulary that they can grab onto, right? So you can lead by the content and by the altitude when you're this size city and this size region. So it is, the altitude will be critical.
Thanks. Any other questions?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask one thing. I should know this, but what are kitchen table conversations?
Yeah, so we in a few minutes, we'll have kind of a full overview of what that method entails, why we do it, and we'll also walk you through the first round that we'll be assigning to the advisory committee. So basically, it's kind of it's guidance to committee members on facilitating small group conversations where we design scenarios or discussion prompts, and the committee members all kind of assemble small groups of folks, walk them through similar discussion, take good notes so that we're getting feedback from a lot of different small group discussions that are taking place, not in like a high school gymnasium, but in small, contained settings where you can get, a dozen people talking in detail about a subject for 90 minutes and getting, really thorough sense of why people are making certain decisions based on what gets presented to them, and in many ways, you can see like the open houses, the online surveys, will be using those other engagement opportunities to ask similar questions, so that as we get to important junctures in the planning process. We're getting feedback from small group conversations, feedback from public events, feedback from online surveys, and we're all kind of like funneling these different methods of engagement into, these critical questions about, where to grow, how to grow, and how much to grow. So it's just one of the tools that we have in place for that.
Thank you.
Yep. And we used it on the core neighborhoods master plan. It was valuable on that project.
I just had one more question. I don't see any others, but you'd mentioned the Go 2030 growth plan or the comprehensive plan. We reference that in all of our motions and things. Could you just describe, and if it's not you, it's Nicole or somebody, but how does this interplay with that? And does it sort of override that because it's newer in some ways? Or what's our reference to those documents, just hierarchically? I guess?
I think we're all three looking at each other to see who wants to answer that question. I'll just, honestly, we're not quite sure yet.
Okay.
So, I mean, it's going to be our growth plan in terms of as a future land use plan. So you'll hear us talk a lot about setting the expectations on what future land uses would be or could be. And so this is going to, I guess, the most fundamental aspect is that's how you'll see it on a daily basis as we look at current applications. But there's a lot more that goes into deciding how those future land uses get designated. That's this process that will encompass.
Okay. I'll be patient. Seeing no other questions, do you want to go on?
Yeah. All right. So we'll move on then to discussion here, and we'll start with Charles, who will pose a question that will really be an important starting point for our process here.
Charles, I know this is maybe if you go to the podium so we could still get you, or a microphone, just because we.
No, I can see it. Don't worry about it.
Sorry, we just stream this online, and so we want to make sure that the public has that ability to hear you too. You can carry this around too if you
No,
want.
it's good. There will be signature qualities to a really good plan. Several times I've alluded to Pete's point that the altitude has to be right. But there are several other signature qualities that we want you to be expecting us to deliver, and in our experience, really contribute to the utility of a plan. One is that it gets the big things right. Now, that's a loaded phrase because there are many things that a community may want to touch on. But if it spends so much attention on 15 or 20 issues, but in the process, the opportunity cost is such that it fails to adequately do a proper job on the 2, 3, 4, 5 most important things, you will wind up with a plan that has limited value. So you have to get the big things right. It is a critical signature quality of a good plan, that it gets the big things right. The process of getting to articulate what those big things are is a reduction process. It includes the community having an opportunity to say that these 10 things, these 20 things, these 15 things, these 27 things are important, right? And then if we do our job well, we will help the community, we will partner with you to say, well, okay, if you can only have half of those, which would you choose? And then why? And if you can again have only half of those again, which would you choose and why? And the reason this is important is because unless you are a complete exception, all communities, when it comes to implementation, will have a fraction of the resources that they would like to have and would need to have to actually implement all 27 things they say are important. And to do a few things well is ultimately what becomes critical. So in this process, we will help you get to the point where you very confidently say, these 3 things, these 4 things, but not those other 16 things, right? This is very difficult work, by the way. It's very difficult work. And it goes back to the earlier point I made, which is titrating your ambitions to match what's realistic, right? Not abandoning all aspirations, but not being so aspirational, right, that your budget can't keep pace. Because it's in your codification and in your resource allocation, which comes after the plan, that you actually implement the plan. And very often we work with clients whose first statement to us is, give us something that's implementable. You know, and in the rearview mirror, they have a lot of energy and interest and curiosity. Well, how come we haven't been implementing our Chapter 6 or Chapter 7 or Chapter 711 of the past 4 plans? And it's often because there was too big of a mismatch between the appetite and the capacity to resource the appetite, okay? So getting the big things right is really critical. Let's suppose, for instance, just as a thought experiment, we were all a consulting team here right now, not to Fargo, right, but to Phoenix, right? So I don't imagine you've all been to Phoenix, but probably some of you have, and I imagine all of you have an idea of Phoenix, right? What can you imagine absolutely positively has to be on the list of the big things if we were consulting to Phoenix?
Utilities and water?
That's it. So anything that didn't include that would be suspect, right? Is that fair? Okay. So now let's think about Youngstown, Ohio. Does anybody know anything about Youngstown, Ohio? Youngstown, can you tell us anything about Youngstown, Ohio? Okay. Okay. So it's an eastern Ohio steel town, right? Used to have a population of 125,000, right? Today has a population of 55,000. Okay. In 1962, when they did a comprehensive plan and Kennedy was president, the comprehensive plan absolutely said that we're going to follow the state demographer's population projections, and the state demographer for the state of Ohio said, we will be a city of 250,000. And so they bonded in order to pay for all the infrastructure for 250,000 people. And now 55,000 people are paying off those bonds. So if you were writing the comprehensive plan today for Youngstown, Ohio, what would you think would be one of the things that you absolutely have to get right in your comprehensive plan? Finance and what? Not growth. Finance, so shrink management. How are we going to be a successful city of 55,000, right? When our median age is 48, right? That would be an example, right? How about Duluth? If you were consulting to Duluth, what would you absolutely have to get right in Duluth? Knowing Duluth's up and downs, its economic changes, what would you think you might want to? Probably is going to make the list of absolutely getting it right in Duluth. I will call on people eventually. Tourism. That's it. Right. Right. So, or underneath tourism, what's the extent to which we have to change our economy? Right. We go from this to that. And what does that imply? Right. Okay, so now if we switch over to Fargo, okay? How about take a few seconds, get a pen and paper, and everybody just take a second and write down, in your opinion, the 3 things we absolutely have to get right. And rank order them. By which rank order I mean, if it's 3 and we wind up choosing 2, you don't get 3. What do you want this plan to be sure it absolutely is clear, right? Or is a big thing you must get right in this growth plan, whatever that is.
I'd just like to say that, just from a practical point of view, what is the scope of the growth plan in terms of numbers of years? Because going back to the Duluth example, there are many cities that at one time wanted tourism, I'm talking worldwide, and that was their goal. And now they have the perspective that they don't want so many tourists because it's ruining their culture. And they don't want to provide all of the resources for them because they would rather maintain their own identity. So without being able to look forward, it's pretty difficult to say today it's tourism, but maybe 50 years from now, or whatever the length of time, it may be just the opposite, or the negative attitude toward tourism.
So you raise an excellent point. In addition to the signature quality of getting the big things right, okay, there are two other signature qualities that you'll hear us talk about a lot in this process, right? One is a decision-making framework, right? For how you will respond to problems and challenges that you know today or you're going to be confronting with. How are we going to cope with what we know? And the third, so it's big things, what are the things we know we have to deal with? And the third is, how will we cope with the unknown? When something arises, what will be our basis for responding to the unknown? Right? So if steel prices, worldwide steel prices completely drop, okay? So there's a flood of German steel and Asian steel in the mid-1970s, and Pittsburgh and Youngstown and Canton and Akron and Erie are all going through the floor, right? None of that was predicted. What's the decision-making framework for responding to that, okay? And so it's planning for the known and having a decision-making framework for responding to the unknown and getting the big things right. If you have those three signature qualities and you flesh them out fully in your plan, you'll have a good plan. So, how about the big things? Somebody start me off with, what do you have to get right in Fargo?
Sure, I can start. I don't know about the priority of a couple things in my head, but the one I guess I was thinking of now with the diversion projects, obviously a big difference between the old plan and this plan. We have a finite area for the city. And so we know how much growth as far as area that we're gonna have left. And so we need to make sure that, well, we're gonna know generally how much infrastructure we're gonna have to put in that area. So whatever we allow to grow into that area, we need to make sure that that can, pay for that infrastructure that we have to put in.
So let me see if I'm understanding. So you're saying we have 75 square miles to grow into. I want to be sure that the infrastructure that we put in there pays for itself. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I would, yeah. Little more nuance, because I think we have an area that we have to put brand new stuff in, and then an area that, we need to maintain.
So if you had to sharpen it and say, this is a big thing, what would you say it is? Boil it down.
I want to make sure what we're approving as a planning commission will pay for itself.
Okay, that's great.
We can't just keep growing at some
Okay.
point. We're done growing.
You want it to pay for itself?
Yeah.
Okay. Is there disagreement? Does that seem to make sense as a big thing? Okay. How about something else? What's something else you must get right? Anybody? Yes.
Connectivity, we've got a north-south community right now that follows primarily the river on one side and the border with West Fargo on the other side, and our interstate systems. Connectivity is I think, very important. You happen to mention Phoenix, when you were talking about Arizona or whatever. It's interesting what somebody way back when I was in that community back in the late 70s for a convention, and they had established, somebody in their great foresight had established that a grid system down their major thoroughfares that today still handles that community very well. The core neighborhood plan posed some challenges possibly about 10th Street and University Drive. And as we grow south, we've really got University Drive and 25th Street and then and I-29 as probably the three major conduits with traffic routing, north and south. So I think that's going to be very important on how when we grow that direction, about how do we, being a builder myself, a planner would lay stuff out on grid paper. And yet, being a builder, you like diversity of the land or of the layout of communities. So I think how we get connectivity, which comes up quite a bit in our developments right now, because we're doing a chunk at a time, and sometimes even within those is how do they get back to a major trunk.
So we have that on the table. Two big things are that the growth has to pencil out on the infrastructure side and connectivity. You have to get these two things correct. Anybody want to take issue with that or second that, or anybody?
I
I
would
just-
definitely second that.
You were nodding.
That is what I had also written, I think, in terms of connectivity and
What would you add to connectivity as another big thing? What did you have on your list?
access. So
Couldn't hear you.
access to resources. So when we're talking about how people get to and from the store, to and from work, to and from daycare, how can we shape growth so that we provide incentive to encourage pockets of resources that are close to residential developments?
Okay, so if I get it wrong, I'm going to try to get it right. So you want the growth to unfold in a way that improves access. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Okay. And at a minimum, doesn't make it any worse, right? What would be an example of, does something come to mind when you as you think about it actually being realized, what that would feel like and look like?
Yeah, I guess, well, a couple things that come to mind are what have been said is keeping the infrastructure sustainable so that when we have,
What is sustainable meaning?
so I think one of the issues that comes up often is that in the newer developments, the specials are outrageously high, and there's some, help me out here, Rocky. You're looking at me like you kind of know where I'm trying to go here. I guess, let me backpedal a little bit. I think if we're going to be developing or growing, expanding to the south, we need to have access to food, access to public transportation, access to recreational transportation, but also access to your basic needs, your medical, your childcare, your education. So I just want to, I guess, you mentioned the word unfold. So I guess
Okay.
I would really like to see the growth plan be inclusive of the changing needs of the community, where we're aging, where we're growing.
Let me see if I stay with you for a minute. So it's also not just unfolding haphazardly or unfolding and we don't know how it's going to unfold. It actually unfolds in a particular way, right? And in your mind, if growth is to occur, it should occur in a very particular way with particular results.
Yeah, maybe that's something that needs to be discussed, is what kind of results or what.
Okay.
What.
Anybody else have something to add? A big thing
Yeah.
you must get right.
I would like to add that, maybe to this last point, is that, well, I'm currently president of the park board, so I've gotten to learn a lot about the issues that we're involved with and the plans for development within that limited area that we have by the developments that are happening. Going from 62nd Avenue South to about 100th, I believe, is the amount of territory that we have to the south. But with the Park District, they are buying a lot of land. And one of the things that they're doing is they want to create connectivity within the city so that people can have contiguous or continuous parks development within the other developments. And so I think that's going to be a great asset, because not only is it a healthy asset in terms of vegetation and the opportunity for outside activities, but also all the other activities that come along with parks developments.
That's a great addition.
Because of the fact that in North Dakota, we have, parks are independent from the city and also the schools. So we need to work with them, and we need to work with the schools to make sure that we have schools and parks in all of our neighborhoods. It's one of the issues that came up in the core neighborhoods, is to maintain the schools, so we make sure that we have children in our neighborhoods.
That's good. Anybody else want to add to big things?
I was just going to add to maybe both those comments, and, I think Fargo's done a great job of having, somewhat mixed neighborhoods as far as income levels and those sort of things, so we don't have sort of areas of have and have not, where then, I think, as you were talking about access to things, we have some sort of social equity in our growth as well, so that we're not just putting,
So
go ahead.
try to, one of the things we're going to try to bring to this process is to try to discipline your thinking and sharpen your thinking on these things, right? So be very careful about putting too many bulbs on a tree and pulling those branches down, okay? So you're not going to be able to get everything. You're going to have to make trade-offs. And underneath making trade-offs is your thinking on what you're willing to give in order to obtain what it is you want to get, right? It's the work of figuring out not all of the things that are important to you, but what is most important to you, right? So we have on the table connectivity, right? We have on the table the manner in which development unfolds. We have on the table equity, right? What else do we have on the table? We have infrastructure has to pay for itself. What else do we add to the list?
Well, maybe just the follow-up so I can finish my point there is, I think we have things that pay for themselves, but there are probably things that don't pay for themselves as much as others. And sometimes social equity is one of those things. And so as you're cautioned, those trade-offs are important, but I don't think social equity is a bulb on a tree. I think that's a important, fundamental, big thing. And so I do think while we need to understand the fiscal impacts of things, there's a reason to do things even if they sometimes don't pay for themselves financially, because they may pay for themselves elsewhere.
So there are other ways to measure things?
Yes.
Okay. Anybody else?
Yeah, I would add a broad economic basis that's highly diversified and promoting.
Can you elaborate?
Support that. Well, I think a lot of what we talked about, kind of the constrained use, and that was one of my first thoughts. What came to mind for me was mini community type of areas. So we're not having to traipse from one end of the town and go 60 blocks to get a single service. To be able to have that, we've got to have planning codes and a vision for the town that is going to support a variety of economic centers around the town. And that ties back into some of the incentives components as well. So make sure that we're making it very easy to do business in a mix of areas around the town.
Okay, that's a great point.
Maybe just to that, I think, some of your examples obviously have called out some major things that happened, nationally that causes communities to go under for different reasons, and being resilient to that. I think Fargo's done a good job of that too. When you look through, the 2008 sort of housing crash, we kind of flattened for a while, but we didn't crash, and we came back fine. COVID obviously had, severe impacts on certain things, and we were assisted by the government and, funding and everything else, but we didn't see that impact here. And so I think part of that is because we've been diversified and economically has been helpful. And so I think that is a good thing. I'm not sure how that fits into a plan, but, to build off the things we've done well to make sure that we're not putting all of our eggs in one type of, economy.
Okay. So that's good. It's just an example of, how we're going to begin thinking about this plan in the coming months. What are these things that are rising to the top? How much fidelity do you and the different members of the community have to different priorities, right? And ultimately, your priorities are only going to be priorities if you're willing to pay for them. And what we like to emphasize over and over again is it's only a priority if you're willing to pay for it with your own money. So when we get to the back end of this project, if any of your priorities are dependent on federal or state money, we don't think it's a priority. It's only a priority if you're willing to tax yourselves to pay for it. That's what you believe in. Okay? That's what you'll find champions for, and that's what you'll be able to code for. Right? So that's how we want you to begin thinking about the use of a plan. I'll give it back to Pete, and we'll shift into kitchen table conversation.
All right, thanks, Charles. So yeah, this sort of discussion is a very direct way of trying to understand priorities and decision-making processes in Fargo. But as we mentioned before, the kitchen table conversations are another method for kind of sussing out similar issues. And what we'll do now is Thomas here will provide a little overview of the method. Kim is passing out some handouts, same ones that we'll be giving to the advisory committee this afternoon. And we'll spend the rest of this time talking through one of the scenarios that we've developed for this first assignment. So, Thomas?
Sure. So thanks, Pete. You guys kind of discussed this a little bit earlier, so I'll just get into a little bit more detail. But essentially, there are a number of ways we like to communicate with a community. Certainly, we do public open houses, invite folks in for those. We'll do virtual surveys, virtual open houses, certainly meeting with you, the commissioners in public hearings are all ways that we can connect with different people throughout the community. But there's also people that don't attend those meetings, they don't feel comfortable attending meetings, speaking at a podium, speaking in a large auditorium. And so the idea behind kitchen table conversations is that we'll work with the advisory committee to have them take the questions, to take scenarios as we lay them out to them, take them to smaller group meetings. Maybe they're labeled kitchen table meetings. That's metaphorically speaking. You can hold the meeting at your kitchen table, but it's also maybe meet at a coffee shop, maybe get 6, 8, 10, 12, 15 people together. Maybe they'll coordinate with a second advisory committee member, a couple of them, get 10, 15 people together, meet at a coffee shop, meet in the backyard, around a barbecue, whatever the case is, to meet in smaller groups and to work with that group and ask them the questions that we're asking at these larger meetings. Ask them the questions, what are the big things? We'll go through an example of a particular kitchen table conversation tonight with you all, but to have them take that exact scenario, that exact question to a smaller group of people in a more comfortable setting to get that kind of input. And so that's really what these are about. We're also going to ask you if you're willing to do kitchen table conversations, whether you do it as an individual, you reach out to friends, colleagues, folks that you might recreate with or do other kinds of things with. If you can reach out and organize kitchen table conversations or in pairs, whatever might be most comfortable for you, we're going to ask you if you can do that, help us out as well. Typically, a kitchen table conversation is about 60 to 90 minutes. We'd ask that one person in the group take precise notes and really record everything that was said, and then get that information, collect it back, and get it back to Nicole. Is that where we're sending everything? Is to Nicole? Kitchen to Kim. Or to Kim, sorry, it goes to Kim. And so what we'll do tonight, or today, is actually maybe walk you through a sample of a kitchen table conversation so you can kind of see how it's done. And if you have any questions, certainly we'll walk through that as well. I think, Pete, you're taking over.
Yeah. Thanks, Thomas. And so what you have in front of you is just kind of the one-page handout, just kind of another overview of the method, and then the kitchen table conversation number 1. And as you'll see, it basically has 3 hypothetical scenarios that we're giving to the advisory committee to make part of these conversations. And we emphasize the word hypothetical here. These are situations that we designed to to test some general issues. That we've made them as realistic as possible to test these ideas, but they're also hypothetical. So part of what we stress to our committees as we assign these things is that don't scrutinize the math or the data too closely. Kind of enter it with a spirit of having an informal conversation and kind of just throwing some ideas around. And really, what's important for us is the notes that we get back from the committee members on kind of how people responded to just the general ideas here. What did they like about it? What didn't they like about it? Would they ultimately be in favor of each scenario or opposed to it? And if so, why? Really understanding the why is what is most helpful for us at the end of the day. So the 3 scenarios that are part of this first assignment, the first one has a combination of things, a wind farming project that is linked to a cloud computing storage project in West Fargo. So a few of these scenarios actually do have kind of a regional decision-making component to them, where Fargo would be part of working with its neighbors to identify whether a proposal is a good idea or a bad idea for regional growth. The second scenario is really an open space preservation scenario that would take some amount of land west of West Fargo, basically offline for future growth, and thinking about that as something that may be valuable or may be an issue for the community. You would get open space preservation and a major new recreation source, but there would be the trade-off would be not growing on that territory. We'll get back to that in just a second. And then the third hypothetical scenario on the last page is related to North Dakota State University, NDSU, and a proposal to have an Indian university partner with an American milling company to boost the enrollment of NDSU and its research capacity. But it does pose kind of questions about the degree to which the city might be interested in either in actively working to boost enrollment at NDSU, and there are, again, some trade-offs involved that we have baked into that scenario. So what we want to focus on here in the rest of our time is looking at that middle scenario, hypothetical scenario number 2. And again, this one is about a proposal, as you'll see kind of in the blue block on that page. It's a partnership that is led by Ducks Unlimited of North Dakota. It includes a handful of other partners, including Cabela's, Ford Motors, the Nature Conservancy. And the whole idea is that they have approached Fargo, the county, and some of its neighbors, looking to purchase 12,000 acres west or north of I-94 and west of the river, 20,000 acres west of West Fargo and south of I-94. So altogether, it would be a tract of around 50 square miles that would be a combination of public open space that's placed in permanent easement, and some of that would be hunting preserves, some of that would be parks and trails. So you're taking land offline for future development. A good portion of it would be used for public recreation. You can see kind of what exactly is proposed by each there. Ducks Unlimited would really take the charge of purchasing land. And a big piece of this is that Fargo and its consortium of neighbors would be asked to pay 25% of the land acquisition cost, so about $63 million. So in order to have this major new recreational asset west of the city of Fargo, there would be a $63 million public bill that the city of Fargo would be part of paying. If all of that happens, Cabela's, in its role in this proposal here, would open a state-of-the-art facility just west of West Fargo's municipal airport. So that would be a new retail feature adjacent to this new set-aside block of land. So what must be given? Again, there would be a 25% local share of land acquisition costs, $63 million. There would have to be a way for the city and its partners to collaborate and to sort of to really get together and decide to pay into this local share and to agree to this proposal. And at the same time, Cabela's would need the city of West Fargo to allow certain infrastructure to be provided to support its facility and some additional supportive retail over there in West Fargo. So as you can see, the kind of the summary statement towards the top of this page, really the crux of this is, should Fargo annex and help pay for the acquisition of large amounts of land west of the city in order to create this, what would be a very significant recreational and open space that would have the effect of forming barriers to westward land development in the region here. So when we give this to the advisory committee members, they would, kind of walk through the details of this with their group and then pose the question. So what do you like about this? What don't you like about it? And what's your thinking? Would you propose that, certain conditions be put on public participation in this type of proposal if 25% of the land acquisition costs would fall to Fargo and its neighbors? Is what the public would get from this adequate to meet what would be given? Is this idea of setting a large chunk of land aside? How does that mesh with your view of how the region should grow in the coming years? Is this something that makes sense, that you think would be a valuable piece of future growth? Or would you think it would be contrary to what you think is a valuable or the preferred way for the region to grow? So we'll kind of use the time here to sort of to see what your initial reactions are to this. And again, it's not so much, would you vote yes or no to this proposal, but based on some of these details, why might you be in favor of it? Why might you be opposed to it? And we'll just, give you a moment here to sort of think about kind of what sort of questions you might have about this type of scenario. So would anyone like to start with any immediate reactions to this idea?
Peter, I think this concept is great, and I love it that we get to go out and kind of do these, because I think we'll hit a lot more niches of town, and so commend you on that. One suggestion I had, though, just on the process, it might be good to have, there's a couple local nuances here that people are going to get held up on, that somebody on the staff could probably read through here and just fine tune some of the wording so the discussions don't get held up on, okay, where are you talking about exactly? those type of things. Because that'd be some of my questions on where this is located, and a little confused by it. But I think this concept is great. The thing that stuck out to me the most, though, as a hurdle, when you said 90% of the lands have, the options have been acquired, having way too much experience with eminent domain in the state, that's where my head went right away. So are they going to ask us to use eminent domain to get the remaining 10%? That would be a worry I'd have.
No. No. The case here is simply to illustrate that behind the scenes, somebody's been aggressively assembling land for the last 15 years. They're ready to pull the trigger. They've got options. They're in the 90th percentile. They're going to get to the 100th percentile. But they're not going to pay. They're going to pay 75 cents on the dollar. They need a fiduciary, right? So that's really the issue.
Okay, that's good clarification. Every big public project we've done here is end up having to use eminent domain, so it becomes.
It's not really in here. There's no assumption of eminent domain in here, and we can clarify that.
Okay.
I'd just like to say that I love the idea. One of the things that I've always been fearful of is urban sprawl. And although we may still be a victim of that, I think would be a wonderful way to approach that problem. I've read it in the past about other cities that have tried to do this. I don't know if it's the case any longer, but I had read a few years ago about Lexington, Kentucky, that had created kind of a border around their town that was green space, and that they had tried to contain development so that it was really good development and redevelopment within that space. But outside of that, what I read at the time were a lot of horse ranches and open spaces and just.
Fayette County government is blended, though. So a precondition of that in Lexington is Lexington and Fayette are all one consolidated government now.
Yeah, well, I don't know anything about it. I just know that when I read about it, I was so impressed, and I thought.
Did a great job.
Why don't we, if ever, could we do something
They did a great job.
constrict that urban sprawl?
So Don, maybe with that comment, what you're saying here is that because this is all in one or two spots and not mixed throughout the community, is that a pro or con? Is that what you're trying to get at?
No, I'm just saying that it's a big enough amount of space, so that it would have an impact on who we are and how we see ourselves. And I also like the idea of connecting with NDSU and their research facilities, because that, as far as a land grant institution, is rising in importance continually. To support academics, that's a totally other issue, and it's across the United States. But NDSU as a land grant institution has a lot of clout and capacity.
And that's the third scenario you're referring to.
Oh,
here.
yes,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
sorry.
No, that's
So maybe this is a good example. You guys are vetting out exactly what I warned Peter about, is we are a very literal community. And so these are really to flush out kind of how we think as ideas. And, I think the question at heart, like Charles mentioned, is, so my husband's faculty in architecture at NDSU, and he struggles with this with students, right? Because they're so pragmatic. And so I think the point you're trying to flesh out is there city dollars that go into this? Do we love this idea so much that we are going to put city dollars into this? Is it how we want to brand our community? Are those the kind of
That's right.
kind of thinking you're trying to get from us?
Yes, and it's really, what are the trade-offs here? What trade-offs do you see, right? So there are trade-offs in here. What are they? And are you willing to make those trades?
So they're really just exercises to help us flesh out our values as a community. There's no right or wrong answer. And also for anybody watching publicly, there is no real deal here. This is just a pretend exercise.
That's right. Emphasis on hypothetical. And
I don't want to see
something,
letters to the editor.
Lawyers for Cabela's will be following up. Yeah.
that's right. And yes, something we would want to, glean from this particular first kitchen table conversation is, if there was an upswell of concern about, well, no, we want to grow there. We if you were to take that chunk of land offline, that means you can't put new housing there, you can't put new commercial there. What impact would that have on prices elsewhere? Would that raise prices? Would that make certain parts of the region less affordable? So we would be kind of looking for different concerns kind of rising up from these conversations. And if so kind of and something that we encounter in many communities, because the types of groups that people convene can be very, very different. And so if there's a lot of consensus, if we get like notes from 10 different conversations and they're all pretty much in sync in terms of what people like and don't like and kind of thumbs up or thumbs down, that's useful feedback. If people report back and they're kind of all over the place based on the demographics and makeup of their committee, and different concerns are coming from different sectors of the community, that's also very useful feedback to know what is the temperature on certain issues in different portions of the community, what concerns really rise to the top. So
We've had a lot of examples just in the last 6 months where from my aspect, this would get soundly defeated, this concept, mainly because we had a bridge that was going to go right across over here to Moorhead, pedestrian bridge, that got absolutely shot down because we have 2 blocks, or not even 2 blocks away, a block away, we already have a bridge that has a pedestrian walkway. And the other thing is the city paying 25% with already specials assessments being what they are, I think you'd see people not wanting, to do something like this, and then limiting. Horace is a good example of, West Fargo is all but out of lots. And Horace was the place to go. And the growth that has taken place in Horace has come at a very large cost to the people that they've also elected to offices and the way they look at growth or no growth. Horace was very content, or at least the great majority of the older established part of Horace, to not grow. They liked being where they were. Now they're the hot spot, by permits. West Fargo probably wouldn't be interested in something like this simply because if they do get an opportunity to, right now their growth may go north. There's plans for what do you do with the sewage lagoons that are going to get vacated for growth. We've got great, it's hard to look at a scenario all by itself because right now we've got with the diversion projects, a lot of us are excited that there's going to be a great opportunity with the connectivity of the 20 or 30 miles of diversion channel to have a recreational area.
yeah.
So if anybody, on the surface, this might sound good, but if you look into it, and again, this depends on what element of the population you talk to. I think if you're going to put a wind farm, get away from town.
That's scenario one on this, but we're focusing
No,
on.
I know,
Yes.
but this one, alone, to me, would get soundly defeated only because of the tax implications.
Right, but let me ask this question. So what are the trade-offs here? What's really being put on the table? What would you get and what would you be asked to give up? The community. So you're weighing this. You're on the city commission, right? This proposal has come to the city. How would you make a decision, right? What are the trade-offs here? What's really the essence of the scenario? What are you getting?
You'd be taking your dollars from, right now, the city of Fargo infrastructure is in relatively tough shape. It's been a tough winter. We've got a lot of street projects. You'd be sacrificing, I think, just myself, trying to maintain in an orderly fashion what we have and keeping that, I don't know how, how.
In the scenario, it's 50 square miles are on the table,
Yeah.
right? So the scenario is basically saying we're not going to entitle 50 square miles. That's a land use decision. That is an eventual regulating decision.
Charles, I think, in this situation, I guess I disagree with Commissioner Gunkelman a little bit, depending on where this is, and that's some of my questions on this. If this is really west of West Fargo, it's outside the diversion boundary. This, I think, is a gift to the community, paying only a fourth of the cost. But the other areas that looks like it's within the diversion area north of town by Riley's Acres, then you're giving up a lot of potential growth that could be something else. And so that would be a different type
That's
of
the trade.
trade-off. Yeah, the land use trade-off would be big there, west of West Fargo. It'd be a lot different conversation. But I do think the other interesting part is the Cabela's part, because if you're just talking about, 25% of a, major, paying for a major park, basically, that's a great deal. But when you have to also incentivize one business in particular, then it kind of creates a different, because I assume Cabela's is also paying part of this 75%.
Great point.
So that's a great example. It was 1:28, and I booked you till 1:30. Art and Brett, did you guys have some comments? Yeah, I just want to, I see you guys both
Okay,
trying
I'm
to speak.
going to tell you like it is. I'm not doing this, okay? I'm not going to waste time doing this because we are not going to understand it. It's never going to work. You're talking about hypotheticals to try to get people to talk about what we should do growth-wise and imaginary things. We don't do imaginary here. We can't. You can't build a house without walking through the house up here. We have a problem. We can't imagine things in a house when we look in a room. We can't imagine putting our furniture here, doing something, unless we're walking in the room and we measure it out. So when you give us this conversation, all we're going to talk about is eminent domain. We're going to talk about all the problems instead of saying, hey, if somebody walked in and said, for $60 million, you could do all these great things, would that be something that we should talk about? Well, yeah, but what about this? What about this? What about, no, let's just assume something big is going to happen. Would this be something that we could talk about globally, assuming it's available? Nobody wants to talk about that. Everybody wants to talk about how everything works. So if you ask me, which you are, to do this, I'm not going to do it. One, I'm not comfortable with these scenarios because all I'm going to do is dig into a hole, and I'm never getting out of the rabbit hole. NDSU thing. Well, what about donors? What donors are they? Do they have the donor? Well, no, it's imaginary. Just think about what this would do to our community as NDSU. So I think the scenarios, one, are a little bit crazy for us to handle. Two, I don't know how to draft one that would make sense. To get the answers of what we're trying to get, which is, hey, we want a growth plan. And we want to talk about what's important. What are the big things? Then let's just talk about what are the big things that we want to deal with and do, and then try to work through this. But I think this is going to not get any answers that you guys want, and I think we're going to just go down, because it's going to come back with a bunch of notes about these issues, which are going to be thrown away.
I would agree. I think training on how to facilitate this properly would be essential for it to work, for all the reasons that you said. And even looking at our own discussion here, you repointed us how many times, and you know what the objective is with it.
And so I just want to set it up a little bit differently. I hear you, and Art, right, you shared the same concerns staff had, and this is no fault to CZB. I just want to bring it down a notch. So I'm going to do this with my book club, right? So I'm going to do this at my Easter dinner with my family. And so it's super casual. It doesn't have to be really logistic. It's like, what does my mom think about this? And so it's really just bring it down to, you guys are all professionals. And so, and if you don't feel comfortable, great. You don't have to do it. That's the other point. We want to invite you into the circle of how to think about some of these value things as we get deeper, because it is going to be about trade-offs. And so really, formally, informally, casually, brainstormy, if there's different questions you have in mind that you think would test. I'm not asking you to do the consultant's job. That's a consultant's job. But I think everybody's open to those kinds of debatable themes or theories. So I just wanted to again, I'm going to do it with my book club, right? Because I'm curious about what they think. What do you think about the city contributing to a big chunk of open space for Ducks Unlimited? Is that a good idea or a bad idea? I shared the Second Street Bridge idea with them, and that didn't go very far. So, so it's just that level. And so you all represent, so let's talk about your role as planning commissioners with the growth plan too, before you all leave. You all represent ambassadors to your neighborhoods, to your communities, to your spheres of influence, to your professional groups. So, so we're asking you to be that ambassador for that growth plan process. And so if you, again, just using this as an example, you don't have to do it. So consider yourself an extension of the steering committee. We don't really have a steering committee on this plan as we normally, maybe as you've seen in the past. The folks that we'll be meeting with this afternoon are agencies that consume land, like the school district and hospitals, things like that. So we're really interested in that land consumption aspect. So there's a different group of people about that. We met yesterday with technical staff. And so there's going to be a lot of different touch points on this as well. So I just wanted to build that, where you guys sit with the plan as the planning commissioner. And they're meeting individually, which each of the city commissioners are getting a lot of dedicated time with this as well.
I just wanted to say one more thing, in addition to my support for this project, is that I looked at a lot of statistics yesterday about the numbers of people, I think it's done by Stevens or something like that, numbers of people moving into Fargo, out of Fargo, and where they're coming from. And I would say that a lot of people are moving to Fargo because of quality of life. They're not moving here necessarily, they're moving here from larger places where they come to Fargo and they find quality of life and they don't find all the congestion and all the problems that will go with urban sprawl. So for me, in terms of planning, this is an ideal way to create quality of life.
Yeah, I guess, Nicole, I appreciate your comments, and because I think this idea is great. And I know you maybe didn't get the reaction you all wanted to talk about sort of planning theory on this. But I think what you did get is the local political realities of doing a thing, and you did talk about the political dynamics. And so I think you as consultants need to be a little bit more patient on not dismissing those local political dynamics, because that is what holds up changing in land use or a development from coming in. It's not just planning theory. And so things like eminent domain was my first thought. That will hold something up. And so while that might not be the planning theory you want, that's the reality of us as policymakers that we have to consider. And so I do think with some refining that this could be a great exercise where you wouldn't have to, moderate. I immediately, when I got this, thought my office engineers, they deal with Fargo, but they have lots of ideas and they live all around the state, and be a great one. They'd have good insight into this, but they would pick this apart with lots of things that run into problems because it's just not factually there yet. It's close. And I think they would never get to the planning theory side of things, which I think could be really valuable. So I just would urge you to go back and take a look at this, because I think with a little refinement, it could be a much more successful.
Yeah, and that's where I'm not sure how we bridge into that values concept to fully support that as well. And I wonder if for me at least, the big idea, the thing resonated a lot more. And I could see that being a very easily facilitated mini conversation. You get a lot of big ideas, middle ideas, and little ones versus trying to extract values statements from this exercise.
Sometimes it's the difference, on these plans we talk about getting a vision, right? And Charles, you talked early on why you end up not being able to implement the vision because these little things hold them up in the reality of implementing them. And so on the front end, let's not dismiss the little things, because that's what's going to hold up the plan from being implemented, not the theory. But anyways, anyone else have any final comments? I know we're getting over time.
Thank you for being.
Yeah, thank you for being here. When you come back in June, we hope the snow will have melted, so we'll see about that. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.